it might be interesting to get a man's perspective on midlife. And when I started my search, I stumbled upon a midlife podcast hosted by a male who speaks to both men and women. Perfect. My intention was to see if men and women have some of the same thoughts and feelings about aging and midlife, and I believe there are similarities. But the one striking difference between men and women is community. Women are better at building community and supporting each other. This is not some marketing ploy perpetuated by social media. It really is a thing. What results is a stronger network for women to have camaraderie as we age, and it goes way beyond book club, pickleball, and bunco. Health, wellness, career, relationships, and everything in between. We're removing the taboo from what really matters in midlife. I'm your host, Michelle Folan, and this is Asking for a Friend. Welcome everyone to the show. Today's guest decided that being in midlife didn't make him want to be 25 again, but he certainly wasn't ready to disappear either. Broc Edwards decided that he'd take his well-earned wisdom and knowledge to bring others together to share their passion, enthusiasm, and ideas for mastering midlife to create an amazing second half. His podcast is appropriately named the Midlife Mastery Podcast. Welcome to the show, Broc Edwards.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. It's great to be on today.
Well, it's nice to have you on. I first of all would just love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell them a little bit about you, where you're from, and all that good stuff.
Sometimes people ask, what's your superpower? This is my kryptonite, just talking about myself. I'm normally on the other side of the microphone. Introduction, grew up in a very tiny town in northern Nevada. Since then, I've lived in Indiana, Colorado, Texas, moved about for different jobs and things. My focus is really on learning and development. I love helping people live up to their potential. Whatever that looks like to them, I like being involved in it, whether that's professionally in terms of corporate training, or used to do some coaching, used to do blogging, and now focus my creative outlets on podcasting. In between all of that, I recently took up racing go-karts and try and keep up with my wife and kids. There you go.
You're busy and you're juggling a lot. Broc and I just were talking prior to recording that he and I both have day jobs, like real jobs. We do this in the off hours, so we are recording this in the evening. It is a juggle, but we make it work.
Absolutely. Now, I need a creative outlet. I don't really watch sports. I don't do a lot of things that normal people do. I guess this fills up that time that I would be using in other ways if I were someone else.
Exactly. Same here. How long have you been doing your podcast?
Depending on how you count it. Midlife Mastery is my second podcast, and I started that right about 2 years ago. Has it been 2 years? Yeah, it was 2020. Just released the 60th episode. Prior to that, I was doing a podcast called Imperfect Action, based on the idea that imperfect action beats perfect inaction. Did that for a couple years as well, and that one hit about 114 episodes.
That's impressive. Was there any defining moment that made you say, I really want to do a podcast about midlife?
I turned 50. I turned 50 in 2020. A couple of things happened. One, I realized I didn't know how to do midlife. I didn't know how to do 50. Looking around, I'm very into personal development and self-help books and all that, and I can find a ton of stuff for people in their teens, 20s, 30s, even 40s, and then you hit 50s, and it's like the world just thinks we don't care anymore or something. I'm a little confused about it. I just wasn't finding anything. Even when I did searches on midlife podcasts, I was not finding much at that time. It's grown quite a bit since then, but it was pretty sparse then. Right about that time, I came across just a mention that those of us over 50 spend 50% of the money, at least in America, and we get 7 or 8% of the marketing. That just completely blew my mind. Just shut me down. I could not imagine companies leaving that much money on the table. What I took from that is that if the world isn't catering to us There's probably a lot of other people out there who also don't know how to do 50 and 60s and midlife, and that there's like this space between 50 and retirement that just gets ignored. And you mentioned in the introduction there about me, as I kind of look at marketing, and I'm not a marketer, but I'm fascinated by marketing. It either represents what people think I think about myself or what people think I ought to think about myself. I could not relate to any of the marketing that was aimed at us. It's like we're not getting any, and the stuff that we get really sucks. It does seem to be aimed at either, hey, I should want to be 20 again, or I should just be kind of shuffling off to the side, waiting to die. I can't relate to either of those. I realized I didn't know how to do it, but I did know how to podcast. So I just started reaching out to people and thought, hey, if I'm curious, other people are curious too. There doesn't seem to be an outlet. There seems to be a strong need. I like helping people live up to their potential. That drives me and fits my own personal mission. Just all those things came together. Midlife Mastery was named by a friend. It's a little bit of a misnomer because I am not the person saying, here's how you should do 50 and beyond. I'm the person looking to others to figure out, how do I do 50 and beyond?
To your point, the people that I have on the show are people that typically are experts in their fields, or they are people who have done some extraordinary things in midlife that have given them some better life fulfillment or have made an impact on others. I think we need to showcase those people and let others know that there is life after 50. There's, oh my gosh, we've got 30, 40 years ahead of us. Let's live to our potential.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have there been any aha moments for you since you started doing these interviews with midlifers?
Just the painful aha that I already know what it takes. What it seems to come down to, creating a great midlife is just the same as creating any other great thing in your life. One, know what you want. Two, work consistently toward it. I mean, that's what it seems to boil down to, and that's a little bit of an oversimplification. But there is another component that doesn't fall into that checklist, and that is, I think, just the mindset that this is a phenomenal time of life. I love talking to people who are excited about midlife because, I don't know, it just seems to be the intersection of having the time, the money, the wisdom to really be able to enjoy it. I mean, in my 20s, I didn't have money or wisdom. I had more time. Now that we get to the point where, for the most part, kids are out of the house or headed out, they certainly don't need me quite as much as they used to. I do have more free time and do have more interests to explore. It's a huge world out there. There's just so much cool stuff that we can be doing and we can be up to. It is a great time to learn new things. So often we get stuck in our old habits and our old patterns, and it's really super easy to do. I really get excited talking to people who have taken on a brand new hobby when they turn 50. Some guests on that, in 50, they decide to take up mountain climbing, like ice climbing, mountain climbing.
Oh, God.
That's insane, and I love it. There is, like you mentioned, at 50, realistically, I've got at least 2 decades ahead of me, probably 3, maybe 4. That's a lot of time that I know both is a lot of time and will go quickly if I don't focus on living it to my fullest. Kind of a rambling answer. Sorry, Michelle.
Yeah.
Ask me another question. I'll give you a better answer.
I think there's some parallels here because many women have spent the bulk of their adult lives either caring for children, maybe a spouse, their home. Then you have maybe aging parents or ill parents. Now, like you said, they have more time to devote to ourselves, but we may feel a little stuck. I guess women aren't always sure what it is that may bring them joy or fulfillment. They aren't used to putting themselves first. It's almost as if we need to have permission to say it's okay to put yourself first and to do things that would really make you happy. As you're talking, I'm thinking, maybe men have some of those same, I don't want to say issues, but same concerns, or they almost need a push.
I'm about to speak about things in very gross, broad generalizations. Everyone's different. If what I say is different than your life, great. Leave it in the comments. Let us know. Tell me where I'm wrong. I'm very comfortable with that. But it is interesting. One of the things I noticed was as I look around, and initially, like on Instagram, that's primarily where I'm at on social media, 80+% of my followers were women. I wasn't targeting women. My guesses are fairly split. I haven't done a count, but I would guess it's close enough to 50-50. When I do searches for things dealing with midlife and over 50 and all of that, women come up a lot more in terms of podcasts, resources, ideas, even businesses aimed at those over 50 tend to be, again, gross generalization here, owned by or promoted by women. I couldn't figure out why. In fact, I asked a lot of guests offline, hey, this is something I'm seeing. Are you seeing this too? I'm getting a little off of your initial question here, but one of the things I've noticed is that men don't necessarily have trigger point is a phrase that comes to mind. I don't know that that's accurate, but a life event. How's that? The way women do. In midlife, you tend to get a menopause and you tend to get empty nest. Not that men aren't involved in raising their kids. And again, everyone's different. Everyone's situation's different. Men's identities generally don't change in midlife. They don't have this moment where they're going, I'm no longer a caretaker. I'm no longer worried about other people in a way that's different than they always have been. I think, again, just observation that there's not that pivotal moment so much as perhaps women sometimes have where they're really faced with, who am I? What am I doing? What do I want to do? How is my life going to play out from here on out?
I think this crossroad that you're talking about.
Crossroad's a great word.
I think this is sometimes why midlife women are asking for divorce more than midlife men.
Could very, very well be. From what I understand, there are more divorces in midlife, that it does go up after a certain time. Not an expert in divorce at all, but I can certainly understand how if you've been spending the past 20 or so years focused on career and kids and just getting along, that when those things are removed or changed, you're going, well, who are you that I'm living with? Do we know each other? Do we still like each other? Without really stepping back and going, okay, what is this going to look like for us? How do we want it to be different now that it can be different? It's easy to just stay in that same rut.
I would call it a rut, and I did have a sex and relationship therapist on the show. I'm actually having her back because it was pretty popular. I think people are trying to define what their marriage will look like going forward. Things change. There may be sexual dysfunction. There is that loss of identity. Maybe the wife doesn't feel fulfilled or doesn't have an outlet now. All of those things can play a role in people just trying to work their way through this time. But I would argue, too, that it really should be a great time to embrace that alone time that you have now as a couple. That maybe you can travel and do some things together, but you have to find some commonality in what that looks like.
One of the things about midlife that I have found is that it happens at a different timing for everyone, and there isn't a specific point. When you're young, you graduate high school, and then maybe you go to college, or maybe you go to trade school, or maybe you get a job. Then in that 10-year period, you're probably getting married or having some sort of very serious relationship, maybe having kids. There's all these big life-defining moments that happen, and we're all real comfortable with them happening then. But then you get to midlife, and there's no trigger. There's nothing that makes you step back and say, hey, am I doing what I want with my life? What's the next step for me? We forget that at any moment we can do that in our life. You were talking about maybe people needing permission to go do this. I think that's in part because there isn't this big pivotal trigger moment for a lot of people, the way we get when we're younger. Yet at any moment, we truly can just step back and go, hey, is this where I'm headed? Do I want to head here? Do I want to do something else? When we're faced with it, that probably does cause relationship issues, midlife crises, whatever.
It's also a good argument for counseling, therapy, life coach, something along those lines. I talk about that quite a bit on the show. It's okay to ask for help. We don't have to figure this all out ourselves if we do feel that rut or we don't know what the next step looks like.
It's really easy to get stuck in our habits of how we communicate, our habits of the topics we communicate on. our habits of how we fight. I mean, if you've been married for a while, you get to be pretty pro level at just taking something simple and going right to a cutting argument. You don't have to work your way down to a deep argument. You know all the shortcuts. I'm kidding partially there, everyone, but we get really comfortable with how we think things are, and it's really easy to make some big assumptions based on a lifetime of patterns that it can be hard to break out of that. I would agree. Sometimes that additional help is very, very helpful just to help us see where our assumptions are, where we're not questioning ourselves deeper.
Sometimes there's a stigma, if you will, around asking for some assistance in vetting your options. I think I have come to terms with, hey, it might be nice to get somebody's unbiased little push. I would consider it for myself, and I have been thinking about that recently. Just thinking about, what do I do with this podcast? How do I take it to the next level, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to ask for help. Let's put it that way. You brought up the midlife crisis. I know not everybody goes through a midlife crisis per se. For the gentlemen, what do you think a midlife crisis would look like today?
I have a really hard time speaking for anyone who's not a midlife male who lives in my house. Anyone beyond me. I'm not an expert in their lives. I'm also someone who has had existential crises every 6 months between the ages of 20 and 40. I'm very comfortable with questioning, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? And then fretting about it for a while. I suspect that's what a lot of midlife crises are. You get to that point and realize, I'm not where I thought I was going to be. I don't know where I want to be. I don't see a path out of here and feel trapped where I ended up. Some of it may be just wanting to be cool and relevant again. One time we all were, and then we got busy with stuff, and then we look around and realize just how out of touch we are with the entire world, or the world moved on without us anyway. Here is a distinction I've seen between midlife men and midlife women. Midlife women are really, really good at bonding together, cheering each other on, forming community. Men are terrible at that, from what I've seen. I know there are some men who are good at that. Also, men don't seem to identify with over 50 the way women do. Women, like I say, and this is based just on looking at social media and talking to some guests, women seem to really own the over 50 hashtags, and men, not so much. They don't really seem to pull it into their identity quite as much. In fact, when they do, and this was an early observation off Instagram, the men who identify with being over 50 tend to not wear shirts in their Instagram photos. They tend to be really fit guys in the gym, and that's where they're identifying. Versus just, this is a part of my life. I think it's more segmented. I think men break it down and don't necessarily think over 50. They just think, how are my finances doing? How's my career doing? How's my fitness doing? And all of that. Again, big generalization, but I do think that's something that women do much, much better, is just being able to find people to talk to. From what I've observed, from what I've heard, from talking to people, suicide rates go up in men for men in midlife. There's a lot of isolation and loneliness. A lot of men, our last really solid friend was in college or even before that. Everyone since then is often just someone you work with and you enjoy being with at work, but not necessarily something you carry on into your life. That just tends to be, and I don't know if that's because men are just very career focused or career and kids and family and don't have time for that community piece, or we're just wired that way. I don't know. It's just an observation of some differences that I've noticed. I can say in my own life, my wife is much, much better at keeping up and maintaining and making new friendships than I am. If we can generalize based off my life, and we really shouldn't, but that holds up.
Well, should we push our spouses to try to keep those connections alive with their friends? Hey, why don't you get a poker night together with your buddies? Or I know my boss, he does a Bible study to try to keep connected with a certain group of men. Do we as women encourage that instead of trying to keep the husbands home all the time? Because we hate it when they were gone. We were trying to get 3 kids to bed. You know what I mean? It's like, what do you mean you're going out?
I don't know. I know my wife has kindly tried to do those sorts of things for me, and it drives me nuts. But I'm kind of stubborn that way. I don't like anyone telling me what to do. Even the people I really care about, I don't like them telling me what to do. I do appreciate that support and encouragement and reminder, because at this time of life, time slips by really, really fast. I don't know. I think it's good to step back and think, what are those new hobbies I can explore? What are new challenges I could be taking on now? How can I get involved with other people in that? I think there is something to be mindful about, just reaching out to those friends that we've always had. One of the cool things about the world is the internet has connected us all. And one of the challenging things is that means that some of my best friends live 1,000+ miles from me. I can't pop over and do something with them. They're awesome people, but it takes an effort. There's a challenge there. I don't know what the answer to that challenge is. I think I appreciate the thought and the support. Somewhere in me says I'll figure this out myself, and I'm probably not as good at figuring it out myself as I should be.
I guess the question would be then, how do we keep from spiraling into a funk? You talked about suicide rates tend to be higher for this age group for males. That's scary. Is there something that men need to be aware of to keep themselves from getting to that point? I don't know.
One of my guests, Joe Gerstant, he did a great thing on vulnerability. Something that men aren't good at. It's something we haven't been practicing our entire lives. Again, in general, but especially I suspect my son will be much more comfortable with vulnerability than I was, and I'm much more comfortable with it than my dad was. Just as I learned about it in the 70s, he learned about it in the 40s and 50s. My son, we progress, but we develop those habits and approaches when we're young, and when I was young was 40 years ago. That is something that many of us are not good at, and yet that is that piece of just being able to reach out to someone, have a friend to reach out to and say, hey, I'm struggling here. Or even just be able to say, hey, I miss you, would love to connect more. What can we do about that? A lot of times the connection is pretty superficial or is about other subjects other than ourselves.
In women, we do book club and we have bunko or just wine night. Women are really good at organizing things and getting together. I just guess men aren't wired that way necessarily. That's really interesting. In terms of guests that you've had on your show, I'm just curious, have any of them made you think, wow, I need to do more of that, or that's a really interesting perspective on midlife?
Most of them. There are a few that stand out. Don McPherson, he does a podcast called 12 Geniuses. He was talking about, I think he is planning to live to be 120 or something. Between good genes, keeping himself fit, and where he sees technology and medicine going, it's very realistic to him. Where I found myself getting stuck was just the idea that I'm not even to the midpoint then, if that's the case. What decisions would you make differently in your life if you were going to live another 60, 70 years from now versus thinking you're only going to live 2 or 3 decades?
Well, I need to keep working. I'd outlive my ability to support myself.
You'd probably make different health decisions. As the old joke goes, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. Different financial decisions, different relationship decisions. Every category of life you would think about very differently if you were planning to live 70 more years versus even 30 more years. That one really had me thinking for quite some time. What I see in most of the guests is just an intentionality about midlife, about a strong desire to either they sat down and thought about how do I do midlife well, or they're just too busy enjoying the midlife to have really given it much thought. They're just going nonstop. Guest I've had on a couple times actually just released an episode, Gail Ginsler. She's awesome. She's, 60, 61, very much into kickboxing for staying fit. And I forget if she shared this on the episode or just when we were talking, is that men her age basically can't keep up with her. They're either wanting to retire and sit in front of the TV, or they just don't have the energy or desire. I just love that full throttle, nonstop energy that she has, and other people that are really focused on just having a really great midlife have.
I know who you're speaking of. The way I would describe her is she lives out loud.
Yes.
She is out there. By the way, she looks fabulous.
In fact, she refers to it as living in beast mode. Near as I can tell, that's a great description for it. Her and other people like that, they're just committed to having a really, really great life. I get inspired by that. I love to surround myself with that. I aspire to that. I mean, I have very positive feelings about midlife. hey, I've got human feelings too, and doubts and wonderings. It's just cool to be around people who inspire me. And that's one of the great things I personally get out of doing a podcast is I get to talk to awesome people. I get ideas from them and inspiration. Hopefully the listeners do as well.
Do you take better care of yourself now?
Before I did...
Since before you started having all these conversations with these midlife people who are getting out there and doing it.
I actually was close to this time last year. A guest or someone had posted something just reminding everyone that you probably ought to visit a doctor occasionally and probably ought to nudge those important people in your life to get out there and visit the doctor occasionally. I realized it had been like a decade since I'd done my annual visit. I tend to be a very healthy person anyway. For the most part, haven't had need. I do notice, in fact, one of my goals this year is just to have really great blood work. I've been working on that a little bit, not as much as, well, I'm not there yet. How's that?
I appreciate your honesty, Broc, and I'm not going to scold you for not going to the doctor more often. But I do think that because I have more, I don't want to say I have more time because I'm just as busy now as I was 10 years ago. But I think I realize that I have to be more intentional about my health, eat better, exercise differently than what I did 10 years ago. All those things. I've picked all this up really, I don't want to say Instagram, but following women that are really good at that. It's been inspirational for me. I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to bring experts in health and wellness to the podcast so that people say, oh yeah, I need to go do that. Or, you know what, that's something that's been nagging me and I'm too embarrassed to ask my doctor about it. And I know men have their own issues in midlife that can be cholesterol, it could be sexual dysfunction, it could be a myriad of things. Sometimes our pride gets in the way of asking about it. It's not comfortable. Like we said, we may live another 30, 40 years. Why not be happy? Why be miserable if you're not functioning at your best level?
This is really the age where it all starts catching up. I've certainly noticed that. Was pretty enthusiastic in my youth, grew up racing motorcycles and then mountain bikes and other things, and have just done a lot of stupid things in my life as well. And when you're young, you bounce, and at this age, I don't bounce quite the way I used to. I don't get up quite as quick. This is when you start feeling those aches and pains. They don't go away quite as fast. I've always eaten pretty well, but I definitely noticed some things that I used to eat a lot more of, and just I feel it now when I'm getting too many desserts or too rich of food or whatever. You do start noticing that it's this, you mentioned crossroads of just all those bad past decisions catching up and realizing, and also having the sense of mortality and the sense to be able to look ahead and say, hey, if I keep down this path, this isn't taking me to a good place. I need to nip it in the bud now. That's been a bit of a realization there over the past couple of years, just life catching up, needing to get back on track on some things.
I know for women in this age group, because we're going through menopause, and there's a question here. Our bodies are changing. We are probably carrying a little more weight around our middle. We get a little self-conscious about how we look. I don't want to put you on the spot, but are men super concerned about that? Should we be self-conscious about that kind of stuff? Or are men okay with it because their bodies are changing too?
I've been married 27 years now. I don't know that I have a great answer for that. Both my wife and I have aged together. We have put on weight together. I don't know. I know that I couldn't be the first one to criticize someone else about not being who they were when they were 19. For the most part, and this is just a personal thing, I'm sure everyone's different, but I don't think age is an attraction there. But I've always been a fan of gray hair and people just really willing to be authentic with who they are. Just that self-confidence. I think everyone is attracted to people who have high self-confidence.
I love that.
Being able to just kind of own who you are and where you are and be comfortable with yourself. Those are the people who are fun to be around. Those are the people I want to be around.
I was going to ask you about, you're not going to go out and get a younger girlfriend and get some hair plugs and a sports car.
Younger girlfriend, no. Older girlfriend, no. I mean, just that would create all kinds of inconveniences in my life. No, I'm kidding there. I am no desire, very, very happy where I'm at. Somehow I lucked into choosing really well when I was too young to know the difference, and has worked out well for both of us. But hair plugs, no good genetics so far, so hanging in there.
And yes, you do. You have a nice set of hair.
Sports car, well, already own one, but I've owned sports cars and fast cars and that most of my life, so that's not like a new thing for me. Now, it is a Miata, judge as you will there. I don't know, I say I've been through existential crises way too much in my life to go try and have the stereotypical midlife crisis.
I just had to ask.
It's easy to poke fun, and I certainly do poke fun. You got that stereotype going. I think it is searching for youth, vitality, relevance, trying to feel different. This is also the time in life when we can afford that car that we always wanted when we were in high school. Now's the time of life where we have the time to indulge too much in whatever it is that we're indulging in. You mentioned you're just as busy now as you were 10 years ago, and I would totally agree with that. But I do find it's a different kind of busy. With kids, you don't have as much choice on when you're busy. Once kids are grown, yes, stay busy, but I have a lot more choice on, hey, when am I going to be busy or not, as my wife does as well. I don't know. We can poke fun at the stereotype. I am certainly guilty of doing that. I think it is that yearning, that exploring, that not knowing who you want to be and what to do, and dissatisfaction all coming out in ways that are probably a lot of fun and probably really counterproductive.
And I get that. That's where the coaching, the life coaching comes into play. So we don't go get a girlfriend and hair plugs.
Unless you can afford good ones. That's always the danger. The cut rate plastic surgery. Save up. Get the good stuff.
Get the good stuff. Don't go to Mexico for your hair plugs.
No cut rate. I mean, I feel the same way about tattoos. I see a lot of them where it's just like, man, you probably just should have saved money for one more week before you went and got that one. Again, doing permanent things, if you're going to do them, is probably worth spending the money on it.
With my luck, I would get a butterfly and it would end up looking like a moth in 10 years. As things expand, that's just a bad look. I thought, I'll pass on the tattoo idea.
Always got to think about how are you going to look in the next 10, 20 years.
Hopefully no worse than I do now, but we don't know about that.
That's right.
I did have a question for you, and I was going to play a little game with you and have you rank some things, like in order of what you think men, or what is most important to men, I should say. I think you answered one of these already. My 4 things were success at work, friendships, sex, affection/appreciation.
All those sound pretty good. I think we probably spend more effort on certain things. Some of it's easy to let go by the wayside. We're talking about it's really easy to let friendships and relationships go by the wayside. You got to keep showing up at work every day if you want them to keep paying you. That's easy, but it's easy then to neglect the things that we're not required to do, even if they're still really important to us. And I think that's where that relationship and friendship piece can fall down a bit. We just get focused on other things. I don't know. Can we rate them all equally?
Yeah. Actually, you can. When I was planning out our conversation, just thinking of some things, I think it depends on your personality, what ranks. Some people are just very driven. Success and the appearance of success is very important to them. But maybe some men just really want to be appreciated for what they do.
Maybe some nuance there. When you say success, everyone's going to define it a little bit differently. When I think of success, I think at least the base level, we all want to be appreciated. I think we all want to know that we're doing a good job. We want to know that we're able to take care of us and the people important to us. Whether you're chasing titles or the absolute dollar, we define success different, but I think knowing that we're doing a good job and contributing to the world, I guess that's kind of how I'd broadly define success there. So that overlaps with the other pieces as well.
That's good. I think just the appreciation piece, again, I think that's really part of your personality. Because I think some people just want more appreciation. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram.
Only vaguely.
There are certain personalities within the Enneagram who really want to be appreciated. It's the 2s. They're 2s, so it's 1 through 9. And the 2s really, really want to be appreciated. If that's part of your DNA, your makeup, then yeah, that's going to be important. I'm going to probably edit a lot of this because I'm rambling too. I do want to go back to your podcast because
Yeah.
I want to talk just really quick about how people would find you if they want to tune into your podcast.
It's available anywhere you would find podcasts. In fact, if you want, you can just ask Alexa or Siri to play Midlife Mastery Podcast. You can find it on YouTube, although no video, it's audio only, so it's really boring YouTube. One of the challenges I've actually found in midlife is that a lot of midlifers don't listen to podcasts. If you look at the numbers, our group doesn't listen to that many, and so I found myself saying things like, it's available in your favorite podcast app, and realized that there's people out there who don't have a favorite podcast app and don't know what I'm talking about when I say that. My mom is one of them. Easier just to direct her to YouTube or wherever, Spotify. But really, any place, if you just search Midlife Mastery Podcast or search my name, Broc Edwards, it should come up. Website, midlifemasterypodcast.com. You can find me on Instagram, Midlife Mastery Podcast. Those are the most places you can listen to the podcast right on the website, or if you're like me and use something like Pocket Cast or an app, you can get it there. Spotify's great. Anyway, I'm repeating myself. It's wherever you want to find it.
You know, it's interesting. You just said something about how you and I are both doing midlife podcasts, and people in midlife aren't as comfortable with podcasts. I think we've got a challenge in front of us getting that information out there. And I guess social media has been really helpful for me.
The people listening to this podcast right now don't have a challenge when we say, hey, just go find it on the podcast app. But growing it to those who don't, or when we say, hey, share with your friends, there's a lot of people who are like, hey, you should listen to this. And then you've got to give the person a 10-minute instruction on their phone, and they've got to download an app, and they've got to create another password that they don't need in their life, and it's a whole thing. And so it is just an education piece for people to realize it's not as hard as it sounds. It's just, if you're not into listening to podcasts, it's helpful for those of us who provide them to open up those other spaces. So that's where I started going to YouTube and some other spots just to make it easy to find and really easy to listen to.
Have you done any TikTok yet?
Ooh, I have not. I've downloaded the app. I'm intrigued by it. I'm not that good at video. That's holding me back there from doing much on TikTok. That's one of those where there's not a lot of midlifers on TikTok. If you looked at the percentages, I kind of suspect those that are on TikTok are really enthusiastic about midlife. Smaller but much more excited audience. And I've known some other midlife podcasters who've done very, very well on TikTok. I just haven't explored that territory yet.
I'm not going to see Broc Edwards dancing on TikTok and doing fun little things with little pop-up bubbles.
No, or anywhere else for that matter. So, that's not...
And guess what? I'm not doing it either. I'm 58 years old, and I just figure I'm going to stick to my guns here and continue to do what I'm doing. YouTube, I haven't ventured there yet either, but that might be my next step. We'll see.
That's really simple, so that's easy to do.
Broc, this was very fun. I really appreciate your honesty and sharing your midlife journey and your podcast. I encourage everybody to tune in to the Midlife Mastery Podcast. I've listened to some of them. He has some great guests. Thank you for being a guest today on the show.
Absolutely. This has been fun. Like I say, I don't get to be on this side of the microphone that much. It's a treat for me. I will also say, if you go to the website, midlifemasterypodcast.com, on the right-hand side, there are the top 5 episodes. If you're just wondering where to start, those are the ones that everyone else has liked. Those are really good places to start.
Perfect. Great suggestion. Appreciate that very much. Thanks again for being here.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow Asking for a Friend on social media outlets and provide a review and share this show wherever you get your podcasts. Reviews and sharing help us grow.